I'm Margaret Wallace. That's me. I've been in gaming, technology, and media for far too long. Since 1996. It doesn't sound cool to say that anymore. Game years are like dog and cat years, so just multiply that by 7. In my career, I've worked on all sides of the industry: publishers, startups, large media companies. For the majority of the past 12 years, I've been an entrepreneur and an advisor to several startups in my own right. One is a gaming company in San Francisco called Real Life Plus, and another one is a stealth startup in New York City that is focused on the intersection of gaming and fashion. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I really feel like, and maybe you can all relate to this, if you're a content creator, is, we're all inventors, pretty much. Anyone in gaming or technology, we're forging new roads and new ways and new visions of doing and seeing things. I'm the CEO of a company called Maddox. Maddox is around 15 people. We're based in New York City with a permanent outpost office in San Francisco every chance I get to go back. And these are some of the folks that we've worked with. We've been around since 2007. Maddox is my 4th startup that I've co-founded. We are a primarily bootstrapped company, although we did raise about $1.4 million in angel investment for a game I'll share with you a little bit later on called Shadow Government. In my career, I've been lucky. Not only have I worked on all sides of the industry, but I've also had the opportunity to run startups that are funded through a variety of mechanisms. So pure bootstrapped. I've raised venture capital before, and now I'm sort of doing this hybrid company where we're doing both branded IP and original IP through the angel investment. So it's given me kind of a unique, hopefully, and sometimes jaded vantage point of our industry. And a couple years ago, I really started getting into the Twitter. I don't know how many people here are on Twitter at all. I did it primarily because I was just interested in Twitter as a new social media tool, but also as a way to kind of teach myself and remember data points about the industry. Because as you know, when you're raising money or you're trying to get investment of any kind, being able to talk about data pretty fluently is a real benefit because it makes you sound smart. So as a result of my time in Twitter and advising companies, and also just my time in the industry, I think any of us who are aware in our industry, you start to see trends bubble up pretty easily. And so I really have my Twitter activities to thank and what I've learned from there for this. So one of the trends that I have found extremely exciting, that I was really fortunate that Casual Connect gave me the opportunity to discuss with you today, is sort of the intersection of reality-based games and the real world, right? And what's really fascinating is I've seen this trend over and over in numerous ways, and I've seen people who are creating games approach the intersection of gaming and the real world all from different vantage points, but we're all kind of bubbling up to the same sort of, not the same ideas or ideals, but I've definitely noticed a real need and desire for people to link gaming activities, not across the board, of course, to what's happening in the real world. Now, I just wanted to share some data points on the game industry, just to kind of give some context to why I feel like this is important. So analysts love giving numbers about how big a certain industry is. I'm sure you'll find different numbers for the size of the industry depending on which analyst you're reading. But DFC Intelligence has predicted that gaming is a worldwide $70 billion industry by the year 2015. So that's US dollars. And then in 2010, digital games generated $25 billion in sales in 2010, and that's according to the Pew Research study on gamification that just came out a few days ago. And then in the United States, by the age of 21, the typical person in the United States has spent 10,000 hours playing computer games. So a really powerful, compelling medium, and a really exciting industry we're all working in right now. And yet, waiting for the other shoe to drop, the industry is more competitive than ever. I don't think I need to tell anybody in this room that. That's an obvious sign. So you know how Apple in their App Store says there's an app for that? There are 500,000 apps for that in the Apple Store, just to give a sense. And I know the previous speaker in the other room was commenting, back when the Yahoo Games portal was sort of the fresh new thing, you might have a couple hundred games to choose from or experiences. Here, the App Store has 500,000 apps, across all categories, including games. But games are obviously the most popular. So, since I raised angel investment about a year ago, we're deploying in the mobile space. I've been studying a lot about what it takes to get in the top 25 in the App Store, in the iOS App Store. And that changes depending on a whole bunch of factors. Changes in Apple's policy regarding how an application creator can drive installations, changes in seasonality, so the number of apps that you need to have downloaded per day to get in the top 25 in the United States at least, in December during the winter holiday season is much higher. And you're going to also be potentially paying, instead of $1, if you're going to be paying for acquisition, $1 US, you can be paying $4 US or $5 US during certain times of the season. So keeping track of what it takes to get into that top 25 slot, the whole discoverability issue of an application is very important. And so to that end, there's a company called, I think I pronounce it Distimo. I don't know if anybody has seen these charts. They just released a study a few days ago which is sort of describing the current state of the industry, just using one example of the iOS store, what it takes to get in the top 25 per category on a daily basis. So right now that number is around 38,400. That's not a month, that's daily downloads that you need to achieve in order to reach the top 25 of free games or free, paid downloads, a little less, obviously much less higher. You need about 3,500 installations a day, paid installations, to get into the top 25 in the App Store right now. Now, that's obviously a much lower number, but we all know the difficulties in getting players to just buy an application, a game outright, if it's not attached to a well-known brand or some other compelling reason to download it. And so if you go online and you can check out the other bits of information this company is giving, because they break it down by category of games. So if you're creating an arcade game or a puzzle game, that's the most competitive category. So you're going to have to drive many more daily installs to get into the top 25. But if you're doing a trivia game, that's much less competitive. To get in the top 25 for a weather application, I don't know if anybody here is doing an application about the weather. I think it's something like 100 a day. So much less competitive than the gaming space. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. Compounded with this sort of environment that we're in, and again, I'm kind of giving some examples in mobile, but I think we see this a lot in the gaming space in general. Although Android is the #1 mobile OS worldwide, and that's a real great thing because it's penetrated, Android iOS has penetrated many different countries worldwide. This is the kind of fragmentation we're looking at in the Android marketplace just by device. Now, Samsung are the clear-cut dominators as far as mobile devices for Android at 40%. But look how fragmented it gets. So there's a challenge there, right? And it's interesting. I get to speak with a lot of different companies as we all do. And a lot of the larger companies that have brands that they want to put on mobile are just not even deploying for Android OS at all. They're just writing it off right now, which, is that a mistake? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to justify when you look at this fragmentation, but I still hold out hope for the Android OS, of course, given how pervasive it is. But we just have to solve this fragmentation issue. It's the same old story, right? You just hear the same old themes over and over again in gaming. Fragmentation, discoverability, increasingly competitive landscape, gaming industry cannibalizing itself because we're so busy trying to replicate somebody else's success. And I understand why, because gaming, as you know, it's getting more and more expensive to create games, much more competitive. And forget the cost to create the game, to market the game. I was talking to a pretty high-profile social gaming company in San Francisco, and another startup who was saying, I have $200,000 to spend on my marketing for my game, which costs about $200,000 to spend to create. And the person from the very high-profile, successful social gaming company said, "That's all? You should have raised $5 million to market your app properly." And that's the reality, at least in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, that is kind of relevant and prevalent and real. So before I continue, I should ask, how many people here are developers, just to get a sense? Okay. So I know I'm focusing a bit on the mobile space, but I was just trying to give a sense of how competitive the landscape is, and this is just one example. So what does it take to stand out, right? And, I had a meeting with a very well-known social networking platform, and they were kind of talking to me about what they thought it took to stand out in games. I don't think any of this will surprise us. One is a mountain of success. Your Zynga, for example, your Playdom. You have an amazing, phenomenal track record. You have an amazing ecosystem of games, cross-platform games to cross-promote to each other. That's certainly achievable for everyone in this room. We could all achieve that mountain of success with a whole portfolio of games that we own and control and distribute. But that's not the only way to kind of stand out, in my opinion, although that's a really good way to stand out. Traction, obviously. Traction's another clear-cut way to stand out. So, I remember back in the day in Silicon Valley, you used to be able to have your gaming company funded basically with having your idea written on a napkin. And I mean, I'll be very honest, when I raised $3.5 million in venture capital a few years ago, we had barely more than something written on a napkin, and it was really quite easy. Now I speak all the time to startups in the Bay Area and also in New York City, just because I feel like it keeps me fresh and keeps me sort of in tune with what's happening in the real world. And one thing that I hear over and over again is, unless you have that past record of that mountain of success, if you don't have any kind of traction to show, it's not impossible to stand out. It's not impossible to raise money. It's not impossible to be noticed by, the Apple Store, for example, to be featured. But it's going to be much more difficult. And then differentiation, obviously, that's another thing to stand out. So, if we think Farmville's really cool and we're going to make, Villageville and Townville, chances are you'll be sued by somebody for being too close to their IP. But also, it's just not going to be generally not going to be differentiated enough. Obviously, there are exceptions to everything. We've seen the Ville model be successful in gaming. We've seen the bubble popping game that was referenced earlier have continuous success. But something to differentiate what you're doing. If you don't have a pile of money and you're not planning on spending $5 million to market your app, something to differentiate and make you stand out is potentially a huge benefit if you are concerned about things like people discovering your app to begin with or your game. And then having some kind of fair or an unfair advantage, right? And I think when I talk about shadow government later, I think we were kind of lucky in that we have kind of an advantage that really nobody can compete with on a certain level, and I'll explain that later. Very lucky, that's, but is it some kind of technological innovation? So we're all familiar with Pinterest, right? Which I know isn't a game, but Pinterest had an initial unfair advantage or a fair advantage of having incredible virality baked into the design of the product. They figured out how to master virality better than Twitter. Pinterest, people familiar with Pinterest? Oh, Pinterest. It's kind of like one of the hottest startups in Silicon Valley. It's basically just pinning images that you like on boards and sharing it with your friends. It primarily appeals to women, but in the short time this company, Pinterest, has been in existence, they generate more referrals than Twitter and I think possibly Facebook. Yeah. So remarkable success. Now that's a short-term advantage they have, right? That they figured out virality so well. There are going to be many people following that, but for now, they were first to market with this idea, executed in such a good way that it gave them a fair advantage in this instance. And the Pinterest, by the way, I know you should look it up. It's really interesting. They are one of the hottest stocks on the secondary stock trading market in Silicon Valley. So if these secondary stock markets identify startups that are really hot, they will acquire employees' options, knowing that this company is going to be huge. And so I don't know if you've heard of the secondary stock market, but that's a whole other interesting thing that goes on in Silicon Valley. So this all leads me to the purpose of this talk. Explosive industry worldwide. I've never seen gaming be so pervasive in my entire career. People who never even thought or talked about games talk about it all the time in popular media, in a whole variety of ways, but incredibly competitive and increasingly so and increasingly expensive to deploy. So that led me to realize that in the time that I've been running Maddox, that I've noticed that I've had so many people come to me to differentiate themselves and with a desire to see how the real world intersects with games. And oftentimes when we talk about that, at least in the United States, people think about things like games for learning, educational games, because that impacts the real world because people learn and are taught. Games for good, have a positive impact on the world, Gamification, I'm sure everybody here has heard of gamification. And I know it's a much derided term, but I'm going to talk about it. Augmented reality is another way in which people who are creating games are trying to tie the real world in some way to games to try to make them stand out, and also because it just seems like a lot of people are just being compelled in this direction. Location-based games, another example of gaming intersecting the real world in a real physical way with location, checking in. And then another area that's of particular interest to me, which is big data, which I feel that shadow government falls into, and I'll explain why later. So games for learning, there are many great examples of that. I don't need to get into too many of those. But if we accept that a game is a form of play with goals and structure, we can see why gaming provides a really excellent context for learning. There are practice runs for whole range of real-life situations and events, or they can be. So that's what led Bing Gordon. Bing Gordon is a pretty well-known venture capital investor. He was, I think, one of the first investors in Zynga. He was one of the founders of Electronic Arts. I had the great fortune to have a private dinner with him and Mark Pincus and a bunch of those guys a few years ago. And Bing Gordon put up an image of World of Warcraft and said, you know, he wouldn't hire a CEO he would rather hire a CEO who ran a successful World of Warcraft guild than one who had an MBA degree. Because if you can run a successful World of Warcraft guild, then you've demonstrated some leadership potential, and he really saw that as sort of the future of learning things like leadership and how to work with groups, how to work collaboratively with people. This is a game we did recently, you know, pretty straightforward games for learning about teaching history to teenagers. But one of my favorite examples of games for learning, because, you know, I come from the traditional gaming industry and, you know, educational games, games for learning, you know, not the most exciting aspect of games, you know, if you think of traditional gaming, you know, we're all about, well, we're entertainment, we're an entertainment medium. And then a company like Rovio took a game like Angry Birds, a phenomenal hit game, as you know. My 71-year-old mother plays it religiously every single day. She calls me all the time and says, I have 4 gold eggs. I don't really know what she's talking about. I think she's talking about her success in the levels. But I don't know where those 4 gold eggs, because it's always 4. These guys were phenomenally successful, or are, right? They did not have to partner with NASA, the United States Space Agency, to collaborate with NASA to have them work on the Angry Birds space physics engine, but they did. And they didn't just do it out of altruism. They didn't just do it to help NASA out. Even though NASA, the whole thing started through a Twitter conversation where NASA offered to help Rovio out, but I would submit it's probably more the other way around. And there's an astronaut right there in this photo demonstrating how an angry bird would act in space for the release of the game, which I think is a great photo. But there's also a really solid business case behind it. So this is from an article in TechCrunch. It's pretty text heavy. But you know, one thing we all admire Rovio for is their incredible business savvy around merchandising their product, right? How many of us in gaming throughout the years have known this is what needs to happen? It's not easy to create merchandise around your game. I did it once on a product I worked on called Pets, Dogs, and Cats, where we sold little plush pets that were accompanied the game. But you don't really see too much of it, and you don't see it the way Rovio has implemented the merchandising. But they've taken their work with NASA and obviously Angry Birds Space, and they've created a whole series of merchandise, transmedia properties around this. So a National Geographic book about space, a special edition of a magazine from News Corp, a space-themed apparel. So I just want to say, like, it's not just because we want to do good by teaching people in games. That's a really wonderful goal, but that's not the be-all and end-all, right? There can be really smart, savvy business cases behind incorporating things like, in this instance, NASA's space physics. Another trend that we're seeing, really popular in the United States and elsewhere, I know, is the whole concept of games for good, gaming for good, right? We want to change the world. Reality is broken. We're going to fix things with gaming. And as you can tell, I'm a little, you know, I think there's some great efforts there in this space. It still remains to be seen how much good games can do, but there are people who are committing, money, time, resources, sweat, tears, to pursue this dream. Again, another way people who are in our space making games are trying to attach what they're doing to the real world. Maybe it's because of how much the social graph has opened things up for us, that it's kind of pushing things along to this next level. And so here's a game called Tilt World. It's created by a San Francisco-based company, Zeoplay. A really good friend of mine, Nicole Lazzaro, created that. And she's coined a term called play sourcing. Play sourcing, she says, she's very smart, is using fun as a source of human motivation to help people change themselves and maybe change the world. So in this game of Tilt, which she spent so much time testing it, the art is gorgeous. Her goal is to, she partnered with a nonprofit organization that the more people play the game and pay to play the game, money will be donated to hopefully have 1 million trees planted in Madagascar. Now, some people like VentureBeat, really embrace this and thought it's a beautiful sentiment. And some people say, well, it remains to be seen whether games for good can really, achieve all that. But again, it just shows we're not all making Farmville clones. We're all really just figuring it out as we go along. And a bunch of us, for some reason, are captivated by how the real world and gaming intersect. And this is just one more example. Fold It. I don't know if you have heard of the game Fold It. Not the most beautiful game, but this is a collaborative game which actually is used by scientists. They look at the crowdsourced data that comes out of thousands of people playing this game and see if they can make discoveries about things like the AIDS virus. And in fact, it was a couple thousand players playing Fold It. They were able to identify a protein sequence that would help fight HIV, and it was something that scientists were spending years to figure out. And through the power of crowdsourced gaming in something so simple as a game like Fold It, they were able to have this happen much sooner. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, gaming for good, that's pretty good, right? Helping find solutions to the problem of HIV and AIDS, not bad. And then the much loathed term gamification. I don't mean to. Oh, she told me I had an hour. No, talk to the. Anyway, sorry, it was a little change in schedule. But gamification, everybody's heard of the term, right? Or do you mind me asking if you've heard of it? It's so hotly debated in the United States. I feel even embarrassed talking about it here because it's such an ugly word. People get into screaming arguments about it. But really, what gamification is, it's the applied use of elements found in gaming for non-game consumer applications, products, and services. So take the mechanics that we are using in our games on the most simplistic level, badges, levels, achievements, rewards. I mean, it goes deeper than that, but at the very basic level, but apply it to non-gaming products. And again, my favorite venture capital dude in Silicon Valley, there's Bing Gordon, one of the early funders of Zynga, saying every startup CEO should understand gamification. So not only are we just making games for ourselves and gamers, we're making games and using the mechanics that we've applied in a whole array of products. Things that we do in gaming every day, right? are being applied in a whole variety of applications where you talk about healthcare, finance, government, consumer products, shopping, news, travel, education, and fashion, which is something I've been very intimately involved in for the past 6 or 7 months. And there was a study that just came out a few days ago. It's a bit of a typo under the source. It's the Future of Gamification study and by the Pew American Research Center, or something like that, Pew Research. The use of game mechanics, feedback loops, and rewards will become more embedded in daily life by 2020. So I remember back in 1996 when I was doing games, people didn't care, or just a small subgroup of people cared. It had a very narrow focus. And now, whether you're talking about Nike Plus, a running application, which has elements like competition and points and badges to track your running and to track your progress against your friends, or whether you're talking about a website in the United States called fab.com, which are using things like a scarcity and forced choices and priority access. These guys are raising $100 million right now. They've been a fashion-focused website. They were around before that, before less than a year. They're touted as like a leading e-commerce fashion site that uses game mechanics. And look how simplistic it is. It's just the beginning. And so in the United States, people in the traditional gaming industry say, oh, gamification, it's bogus. Maybe it's bogus, but I never knew anyone involved in the fashion world who even gave, I'm sure there are exceptions, but who even thought about gaming. Now it's fashion tech, gaming and fashion. It's on everybody's lips. I live in New York City, and very fashionable place like it is here. And it's just amazing how much our world has changed. The Honda Insight is another one where you're driving a car, but you get echo points.
Yeah, there was a confusion because there was supposed to be another speaker, but he canceled, so you do indeed have an hour.
All right.
Yeah. Apologies for the...
I just leveled up. All right. Do I get my badge now? Just kidding. I'm sorry, we forgot to tell you because it was a early morning change, so sorry about that. But back to the Honda Insight, right? How many cars have we driven in the past where we get points and levels to show and demonstrate how much fuel we're saving? Now, okay, that's not really a game. Of course it's not. But it's using game-like elements in a product that never had anything to do with games except maybe a sponsored racing game on the Yahoo portal site or a sponsored car in a social gaming app, right? The workplace is another area. You're going to see an explosion of applied game mechanics in the workplace. Here's a company I love. I must admit, I discovered them. I met them at a conference. This is a company called Objective Logistics. They are basically, they cater to the restaurant industry. They have a product called Muse. And what they do is they visualize, it's kind of insidious, but they visualize competition among restaurant workers. So you can compare your progress with other people whom you work with. And you can also see data visualization. Again, that's another trend in technology right now is data visualization. You can see a visualization of how much you're progressing in comparison to your coworkers, how much more money you'll make in tips for selling more drinks, selling more martinis. So, this gets into the area of, not this product, but a lot of people criticize applied game mechanics or gamification as being very manipulative. I would say all culture is manipulative on some level. And, and again, to kind of demonstrate my point, here's the February 2012 Popular Science issue, right? My co-founder and I worked with this journalist who wanted us to make a game out of his life. And so we worked with this guy for about a month where he basically wanted to see if he used all the applications available in the App Store and kept track of his progress, whether he would have a more fulfilled and happy life. He was kind of interesting because he was mostly interested in seeing how this applied to his relationship with his girlfriend. So we were gamifying his love life. We were adding game dynamics to his love life. And I think he was pretty successful. I think he was pretty happy. So not to be overly simplistic about it, but he did find that even after the week where this is the guy where he was tracking everything he did, and he found that even after he stopped doing it, he would think back to the points he would win by using applications like Epic Win, which tracks your chores. Now, I'm not suggesting that I think these apps or gaming experiences that intersect the real world in terms of your life are effective, or that they're going to change a person's life or change the world necessarily. But what a different world we live in that people even think like this, that people even consider this, and consider it to debate the merits. So I just think it's exciting to see how much what we do is touching every corner of society in one way or another. And so there's a local company here, GameMaki. Have you guys heard of GameMaki? They're a local Singapore company, and their whole focus is encouraging sharing and discovery with friends by adding game mechanics. So here's a real-world example of how gaming and the real world intersect from a local company, and I'm sure there are many more here because this is such an amazing region for innovation. It's just really exciting to see. So all of these examples show why Gartner, a research group, said 50% of corporate innovation will be gamified by 2015. Now, is that an exaggeration? It probably is. And by 2015, do you think people are going to say, that's gamification? Probably not. I hope not. But I think that it will be so pervasive and built into our products and services and experiences. I think it'll get toned down a little bit more. But gaming is here, and it's here to stay, and it's here to stay in the real world in ways that have never been seen before. And I really do think the social graph has a lot to do with opening that up and leveraging that. So once you start thinking about gamification and the gaming in the real world, you start to see it everywhere. So here I am, landing at Singapore airport, and I'm in the restroom, and there's a screen display as I'm exiting. Please rate our toilet. Now, is that necessarily a game? No. Does it use game-like elements, the iconography, the feedback mechanism? Sort of. But like I said, to me, this is a sign of how these mechanics are starting to pervade our world. And so I don't know if anybody here has heard of Tim Chang. Changification. He's been a leading proponent of the whole idea of applied game mechanics. He's a managing director at a venture capital firm called the Mayfield Fund. And he had an article that appeared in TechCrunch a few days ago, fortunately in time for this conference, where he said the next target for applying gaming mechanics will be in the areas of education, e-commerce, including banking, local retail, and financial services. So while maybe none of us in this room has the slightest bit of interest in doing this, I can tell you there are hundreds and hundreds of startups that are focused in these areas and getting funded. Location-based games, another area of how gaming and the real world intersect. Couple examples, just to, and again, Location-based gaming gets a bum rap, right? I don't think anyone's really quite ever figured out how to use location in a really awesome way yet in games. I still hold out hope. But again, here's another example of game developers creating content that they somehow feel a desire to have it tie into the physical world, physical space, the history, the timeline, and in this case, physical space. So there's a game called Traveler's Quest, which is one example. DokoBots is another example of location-based games. And then this isn't like a strict location-based game, but this is a project we worked on with Disney Publishing called Kingdom Keepers, where it's a choose-your-own video adventure that rolled out over 20 weeks. And we went down to the Walt Disney World in Florida, and we created a game based on the geography of Disney World. So this is for a product called Kingdom Keepers. It's sort of like the Disney villains versus these really do-gooding teenage kids who keep the Disney park safe from the evil villains of Disney. But if you have never been to Disney World and you play this game, you would get a sense of the geography and the locationality, the spatiality of that theme park. Augmented reality is another example. Pokemon Dream Radar for 3DS. Nintendo just announced they are introducing an augmented reality component. Again, merging our real physical world with gaming. And then big data. This is kind of where I have been lucky to have had some experience. Like I said, I raised about $1.3 million in April with a series of Swiss-based angel investors to create a game called Shadow Government. This is a screenshot, Shadow Government, and we're deploying on the iOS store sometime this summer. And basically, when you look at the game, the one screenshot's a bit small. It looks like just your average simulation game, right? And what's really different about it? Well, can you imagine knowing exactly how a country will be affected tomorrow by the decisions you make today? And that's the premise and the promise that we hope to deliver for Shadow Government. It's not just another simulation game. In our game, you're playing a real version of the United States. So you can play a news event, and you can be any political affiliation you want to be. And what results are shown in the game will be around 90% accurate to what would happen in the real version of the United States. If we're successful, we would like to do a Shadow Government India, Shadow Government Singapore, Shadow Government Europe. It will be astoundingly accurate. So in the United States, if you don't like Wall Street, don't bail it out and see what happens. See how it plays in the game. These are not made up. This is not made up data. It's real data. The automobile industry was a huge deal in the United States a few years ago, where our government bailed out the industry. People were very divided whether that was a good idea or not. In this game, we hope you'll be able to test that out and play that. You can decide the fate. If you can compare your results to President Obama and to your friends. And the reason that you are really playing the United States is that and here's again the fair versus unfair advantage. You're playing, we have exclusive access to a country modeling algorithm that, in partnership with a company or a Washington, D.C. think tank called the Millennium Institute. It's an algorithm they've been building for the past 30 years. Talking about an advantage. We were just so lucky to have this opportunity, I must admit. So the gentleman standing with Bill Clinton is the president of the Millennium Institute, and he's the reason that we have access to this algorithm, which until now has only been in the hands of governments and policymakers. It's the first time, for better or worse, it will be incorporated into a consumer-facing product. So how much time do I have? Okay. Do you guys want to see a trailer for very serious game sounding, right? We're trying to not make it serious. So let me see if I can play this trailer. If the sound doesn't work, I will just... Do we have audio on this? Do you guys know? Oh. I think we're having... Whoops. I don't think that's going to work. Oh, well. I wish I could show you the trailer because it's the first time anyone's seen it outside of my company, but there you have it. Anyway, look at that. Shadow government forces at work. Anyway, we had a lot of pre-press before the game launched, which I wouldn't advise, but we did. And we're really excited about it. We really hope that it'll be one way in which big data can be leveraged to make it accessible to people, to help them understand what drives and motivates policymakers, and understand what their politicians are doing. And I hope someday that we don't stop with the Millennium Institute and their algorithm. Maybe one of us in this room will partner with NASA or partner with other financial institutions who have big data and want to see it in a game. Again, another way that our world is being quantified and made sense out of through, I hope, games. So that's my presentation. I really appreciate your time and that you're all here. And thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your show.